Hey, what's up, everyone? Mac here. Just wrapped up our first interview of the podcast. I interviewed a longtime friend of mine, Tyler Theune, who is a very successful sales manager. Basically, opened up his own division after a high performance level with his organization. They basically gifted him his own division, which he's turned into an $8 to $9 million organization in under 2 years for the main ownership group. So Tyler talks a lot with me this evening about, what he defines as success. He doesn't let others define his success, and he kind of shares some thoughts from something he picked up from Brian Callen, the famous comedian. We also talk a little bit about managing our time and the importance of tracking it, and frankly the value of time that both his parents and my family also taught me individually, or taught us together, I should say. Tyler really kind of goes into detail about what he's looking for in his staff when he's looking to hire, and things that are difficult to train. So I really think if you're someone that's in a sales role, or just a father or another parent trying to become a little bit more in tune with what's going on around you and understanding that you're not alone in some of the things that we go through, this is definitely an episode for you to pay attention to. I do want to say the audio is a little messed up. I adjusted my gain about 20 minutes into the podcast, and it did throw some things off. And so I do apologize that my audio kind of drops out a little bit, but if you just kind of turn your volume up, it should take care of it. And I definitely think we'll get that taken care of in the future, but that's totally on me. Won't happen again. But please leave me your comments, send me your DMs, send me your text messages, call me. Any feedback is appreciated. And above all else, please share this. Really my goal is nothing more than to, create a community of conversation, with other individuals and like-mindedness, kind of trying to find that balance between work and family life, but mainly trying to make sure that they can give, as much as they possibly can back to their family. But hope you're enjoying this and look forward to continuing the conversation. Be well. Hey, and welcome to Sales Dads. My name's Mac. Today I'm actually joined by a really good friend of mine, someone that I was just reminded we've known each other now for nearly 15 years. That'll make you feel old. But I'm joined today by my good friend, Tyler Theune, who's a very close friend of mine that I've known since our time together at Stanford University, where we were both students together. We met valeting for the same company while also being students and RAs together. We also share a pretty unique passion for cars and a little bit of hunting. But Tyler's started off by working in the retail sales industry for quite some time, in the essentially business to business side of things, before he eventually jumped into other types of sales. Tyler currently works in a business to consumer sales industry, currently working for, I believe, the largest exterior home remodeling company in the US. Tyler actually has a wife, and they just recently welcomed their first child, Olivia, who's just over the age of 6 months old. And we're really excited to kind of welcome Tyler today and talk a little bit more about what makes him successful and how he values his time and how he makes his team that he manages successful as well. So Tyler, man, thanks for coming on here, brother. It's good to see you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate the kind words. It's a pleasure. I'm glad to see you doing this thing.
Well, it's weird because, every time, I log in and I do this, I just kind of feel awkward about doing it. And it's just, I don't know. I think there's like a little bit of imposter syndrome, but at the same time, I don't really necessarily buy into imposter syndrome. I mean, granted, I just think that it's like fear of what others think, right? And so, and that, I think is applicable to the sales field as well, what we do.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just thinking about this whole imposter syndrome thing recently because there was another podcast entirely unrelated to sales, and they were talking about the idea of fake it till you make it. And it's like, to some extent, that's a very real thing, and then to some extent, it's not, because it's like, whether or not you have the skills to be there. It's just sometimes you have to develop those skills a little bit along the way. So sometimes to me, that's like, I don't know, those things to me are tied in as far as like imposter syndrome and the idea of like faking it till you make it. Because it's like, well, you typically have to develop some skills to like get to a proficiency level, but that doesn't mean you're necessarily like an imposter, I guess. I don't know. It's kind of a weird, I feel like we could do a whole hour-long talk just on imposter syndrome.
No, I agree with you, man. I think it's a blend. And I mean, to some degree, like none of us get good at what we do without repetition, and it's, when you go through, and I don't know your industry, but when you go through your flow, or when you're training your guys to go through their flow on their, visits each evening, they're not going to be good at this first time out. It's, as my oldest now is about to turn 5 this year, it's, she struggles with this idea of not being perfect at something immediately. And it's the same thing there as a dad. It's like trying to get your kids to realize, hey, you're not going to be amazing at this first time through. And then ironically, sometimes I expect the same of myself, and I have to remind myself of the same thing.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. The like perfectionists that you see in people, and it's the old 10,000 hour adage of like you got to do it
Hmm.
for 10,000 hours, and it's like how
Hmm.
many things have you really done for 10,000 hours? And then I always wonder, like, the things that I have done for 10,000 hours, I'm still not very good at them. It's like, oh boy, it might be like a 50,000 hour kind of adventure here.
It's like, how many times can you make a cup of coffee? It's like, well, you make a lot of cups of coffee, but how many times are you going to do a different scenario for each kind of sales, moment you're going
Yeah.
into, and like that's a lot different, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
So,
a wild thing, but man, it's been cool seeing you start this up. So I appreciate you asking me to be on here. It'll be fun.
well, thanks, man. I'm glad to have you on. You're the first guest, so I really appreciate you making the time. But I mean, how's
It's a
life
nice
in general?
honor.
I mean, y'all will yeah. I hope it's an honor. You're hilarious. But I mean, y'all just got settled. You've been in Huntsville now almost 2 years. Is that right?
Uh, about a year and coming up on a year and a half. So we moved down here in March of 22. Yeah, because it's 23
Okay.
now. Yeah, so it's been really cool. Huntsville is a pretty interesting place in the way that it's growing.
Hmm.
I feel like you look across the country right now, and everywhere there's just an ungodly amount of construction going on, and I wonder who's moving into all these places. And everyone says there's a housing shortage everywhere, and I don't I don't quite know if I buy into that entirely.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
sometimes I'm like, are ghosts living in these? Like, who is buying these places? But um,
Yeah.
Huntsville's growing like at an insane rate. It was listed as the USA Today like number one place to live for like 2 out of the last 3 years, and I think this year was number two on the list.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of interesting things, and it's every industry you can imagine. It's a very intelligent market. It's kind of a tough market to sell to, in that like we joke that like you can throw a rock and hit an engineer here. Like you go out to a bar, and every person
It's
you meet
true.
at the bar is an engineer of some type, whether it's government contracting or NASA or the car manufacturers or whatever it is. It's just engineers everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's a very
Yeah.
educated market. It's a really cool place to live.
I just saw a news break this morning actually, and it was saying that U.S. Space Command decided to pass on establishing their center in Huntsville. And when you go look at the photos that they used for the pitch, even though two different independent, um, I believe, consulting agencies did the research for them and both recommended Huntsville, the photos that were presented to the U.S. Space Command made it look dated, and it's like, what in the world? Like, Huntsville is honestly one of the most unique cities in the country, from the, as you just mentioned, I mean, the amount of engineers in one location, the amount of knowledge in one location. Um, Very capable in modern town. It's kind of surprising they're kind of getting the bump.
That got a weird like news story too, because I didn't understand it initially, because I just happened to see online somewhere something about exactly what you were saying about the photos, and they shared like a very recent photo just the other day of like the downtown, the kind of skyline, and showing the rocket over at the NASA
Yeah.
center here. And then they showed the one, and it was almost like they desaturated all the photos that they used for the
Hmm.
submission. It was really, really weird. And there's been a lot of like controversy around like, was this all like a big, yeah, I don't know, is this some big conspiracy theory to keep it out of Huntsville? But at the same time, like, I laugh because it's the people that are in Huntsville are like, good, stay away, please stay away. Like, there's enough people here. We don't need more people. Like, it's already growing at a crazy rate. But I
I
don't know.
get it. I mean, we're dealing with that here in Nashville, and having,
Oh my gosh.
born and raised here, man. Like, I grew up in an area. I think my parents, my childhood home was, my dad bought it for 200 grand, and I looked it up just by happenstance last year, and it sold for like 917. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, this is dumb. It's just stupid. It's like my parents didn't sell it for even 600,000, right? So it's just like, it's nuts to think of like what's happening with growth in different parts of the country. But I mean, you're you're in the forefront of that right now, and we'll get to that. But where I kind of want to kick
Yeah.
things off, brother, is, you right out of college jumped into sales role. So I mean, did you know that this was something you always wanted to do, being in a sales position, or did you just kind of fall into it?
Not really. So I'm kind of a weird one. So my my degree was in economics at Sanford,
I
and
remember that.
my original plan was to go and pursue graduate school. So I really, really enjoy teaching. I always have. If it's something that like I'm passionate about, I enjoy teaching and helping people. Um, so my initial plan, graduate school in economics is a little weird. So if you go the grad route, you either go master's or PhD, but you don't need to go get your master's before you go get your doctorate. Like you can earn them
Mhm.
concurrently. And so I was actually accepted into the PhD program at University of Kentucky. And the initial plan was I was going to go up to Kentucky. They have a great econ program. I was going to go up there and do it, and something about it just didn't feel quite right. I've never been able to put my finger on exactly what it was. Um, so I jumped out of it, and it was a super weird time because I graduated a semester early as well. So I was like, I was in this weird stage where I'm like trying to find a job in January, and none of my friends are going through it. Um, but my dad had always been in sales, so I kind of came from a couple generations of sales guys, and so my dad encouraged me to look at it. And my mother's always told me I could carry a conversation with a brick wall, so like that tends to help in sales. Um,
You and I
and
both.
so
You and
I
I
kind
both.
yeah, so like I'd worked a little bit of retail, and you and I had worked together in the valet world and done these things where you have a little bit of a sales aspect, but it was more of like a service than anything. And so I got my first offer in the sales world for Verizon Wireless, working in a retail store.
Mhm.
I started there. I worked for them for about 2 years. It started as just a straight up just a retail store, just helping anyone coming in. And then my role technically never changed, but I got more into the business side of things because we had some family connections into some of the medical world down in Dothan. There's a lot of medical there where I'm from, and that was at the time where everyone was kind of shifting to just starting to use iPads for actual business purpose. So this is like 2010, 2011. And so doctors'
Okay.
offices were just kind of figuring like there were these new softwares coming out. And so they were trying to figure out like, okay, can we carry these around and use these for patient records? And so I started doing these deals where I do 4, 5, 12, 25 iPads for a doctor's office. And I was making, a pretty good chunk of change in commission on these things. And that was sort of when the bug bit me. Um, and it, I've never really looked back in the sense that like I've looked into other industries and I've kind of jumped around. I went from Verizon to um, I worked for a large tobacco company for about 5 years. Um, that was more in a true business to business role, and then I went into like the disposables packaging world for a couple of years, and that was
I
very
remember
like
this.
yeah, that was great. It was a mutual friend of ours got me connected in that. That was the first like hardcore sales role I had. And what I mean by like when I say hardcore sales, it was 100% commission. There's no base to anything. You eat what you kill. Go develop your own territory. And I remember it was funny because like they didn't even have a CRM of any kind. Like there was, yeah, your eyes light up. Like I had a
Yeah, dude.
dude, I had an $8 million territory with 30 customers that had no CRM. Like we were in the AS400, like old school black and green, like DOS system. And I remember asking my boss, and I'll be honest, he was a great boss. I remember asking him one day, I was like, hey, you don't have any kind of like tracking into what I do day to day. And he told me, he said, if I didn't trust you to go out and chase business and do your job, I never should have hired you to begin with.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh man, those are kind of wise words to live by. And so I've always tried to manage in a similar way where it's like, dude, I don't need to be looking over your shoulder. Like if I don't trust you enough to like expect you to go out and do your job and do it the right way, like I don't need to be hiring you. It's that
Yep.
simple. Um,
It's a real old school way of hiring, and I personally don't see that much anymore. Right?
it
I see more micromanaging than ever before.
it's only frankly in kind of dated companies, and I feel like I see it more in companies that have less middle management, and there's
Hmm.
like you basically have sales guys and maybe like a general manager, and then it's like the president of the company. Like
Yep.
it's almost like these old school like family run organizations because they're like, hey, I'm not going to employ somebody in the middle for 150, 200 grand a year just to be your babysitter.
Exactly. So
Um, yeah, that's at least my perspective on it. But yeah, so I've jumped around. I've seen a couple of different industries, and um, yeah, sales has always just kind of been home for me. Like as stressful as it is, and we all know it, like, the impending doom of another quota or something going wrong, but it's like there's something about it that keeps you coming back.
But let's go to that for a second, because I think for me, and I want to hear your take on this and your wife's kind of what you hear back from your wife. So, you know, I routinely, you'll hit that, that roller coaster moment where every quarter, some folks it's every month, right? You do hit that dip, right?
Hmm.
And like, what the hell's going on? Da 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 da. Other choice words that I'm trying to be better about not saying since I've got three
Sure.
kids now. I can hear my wife right now in my ear. But my point here is, it's my wife hears me get frustrated, right? And I work from home, and she, oh, you do this, it's all every 6 to 7 weeks, like it's gonna be fine. And for me, I'm such a competitor with myself to always be hitting, at the top, and I do, but even those low end short term dips annoy me. How do you respond to those? I mean, I finally now have a way to respond to those where I don't let it bother me. But how do you choose to respond in those moments?
Yeah, that's a good question because it's like I was kind of in one of those last week, end of last week.
Okay.
Like yeah, I guess like Thursday, Friday night. I think it was Thursday night. It was almost like this build up. Like I'm not a real anxious person, but it was kind of this build up of anxiety and I couldn't put my finger on it.
Yeah.
And my wife just asked me, she was like, "What's the worst thing that could happen?" And I went, I mean, I don't know, I guess miss quota? Like it was
Yeah.
like, oh, in the grand scheme of things, not that big of a deal. Um,
Yeah.
for me, I've been kind of trying to find a new rhythm to life with that because of having a 6 month old. So
Yep.
I'll say that like pre Olivia, post Olivia, our daughter, one of the things when I was truly just functioning in just a sales capacity and I wasn't in management, I didn't have a team to manage. I played
Mhm.
golf with a group of guys that I got plugged in with in Virginia every Sunday, like clockwork. We
Okay.
played every Sunday. And occasionally we'd sneak in like a Saturday round and have a double round in a week. But like I think in the year of 2021, I think I played 50 rounds of golf. Like
That's awesome.
kind of an ungodly amount of golf for a guy who's a full-time employee somewhere and working a lot of hours. But for me, like there were little things that I did that made me very thankful no matter what was going on or how bad of a week I was having or how bad of a month. And so like for me, I got to where I really enjoyed always walking with a push cart. So like I'd walk. I wouldn't take a golf cart. I would walk and like you always want to get out in the sun, but like there was something about getting out there and like it I don't know, just being out there and being thankful to like have a body that can move and get out and get in the sun and move around a little bit. And I'm not a big drinker, but like I would have like 2 or 3 beers. And it was funny because like people laugh at me, but I don't know what it is, but like I'd put on sunscreen and I'd always bring Mick Ultras. And I'm not a big Mick Ultra guy, but like there was something to me, you're gonna laugh. There's something, I think it was my dad, but there's something to be had about a Mick Ultra and sunscreen that like in my mind I go into beach mode. Like I'm at the beach. And so like I'd be on a course and it'd be 8 a.m. and I'm putting on sunscreen, lathering up, looking pale and ghastly. And I crack a Mick Ultra at 8:15 in the morning. They're like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Dude, I'm at the beach. Like you can't bother me. Like I'm good. Like I'm so good." And so that in a combination with like getting a little bit of sweat in, going to the gym or hitting the gym at home or something was always kind of that's what kept me grounded. Um, now in a management function, like I have to be so much more available to my reps in the nature of what we do, which we'll get into. But like, I haven't really found my sweet spot. Like, I'm still trying to find out what it is. To some extent, it's just
Yeah.
spending time with my daughter. But like, I'm a huge believer in you got to have things outside of work. Like, if this is it for you, like, dude, those valleys get really dark. Like, they get really dark, and the peaks aren't near as bright as what they should be. So, yeah.
I agree with you, man. I mean, the other day I was kind of talking with a couple of people, and I realized I hadn't, really looked up at the sky anytime recently, and just taken in the stars, let alone had any quiet time for myself. And I mean, we have a family farm, and we bought an adjacent property almost 2 years ago now, and that's my happy place, dude. And I mean, I haven't even been to it in 3 months. I mean, that's that front porch overlooking the valley during hunting season, brother. Oof, that is my happy place. And I haven't been to it in 3 months, and it wears on you. And I think that's something I struggle with, and that's half the reason why I started this as accountability, right? Like calling myself out on it every day. But what I think is important going along with this, not only finding ways to reset yourself is what we're kind of talking about here, it's also enjoying the ride. And where I start to occasionally get that sense of anxiety that you kind of highlighted earlier is it's like I'm almost there. For some reason I can't explain this. I've never been able to explain it. Like I'll just get this feeling like I'm almost there. I've got to get there. And then when I find, but there's a lot of anxiety that comes with that, and like I've got to get there. I've got to finish. But then I sit back and I'm like, well, there is no there, right? The month
Yeah.
starts over again on the first. The quarter starts over again in second quarter. Like there is no there, and getting built up and getting anxious about that process, thinking you're almost there, it resets every 30 days, right? And it's slowly starting to learn to enjoy the ride.
Hmm.
I think that for me has helped me set, aside time to be able to reset myself and rejuvenate myself. And I mean that separate from my family too, because as much as I love being a dad, having 3 kids, I think the important thing is they are first. My wife and my 3 kids are first, but to effectively give ourselves to both our families and in our sales roles, you have to get that quiet time as well. So how do you try to budget in that into your schedule?
I mean, it's an ever evolving thing. Um, I do think you're right. Just take a step back about the journey. Like it's 100% about the journey. It's we get so consumed with like the materials and the things around us, and at a
Mhm.
certain point, it's like you realize none of that really matters a whole lot. Like at a certain level, it's like, all right, is this going to change my life in any meaningful capacity? Not really.
Yeah.
Probably not. Um, I as far as like the time question goes, I mean it's an interesting one. Like for me, I don't know. There's something about myself that I learned when I was still at college at Sanford, where I remember there was a semester where I was taking, a full load considered 16 hours. I was taking 19 hours, and I technically had 3 jobs on paper simultaneously. So like 2 of them I was working with you. One was a different off-campus job, and
Right.
it was the best GPA semester I ever had in my entire time at that school. And
Mhm.
I legitimately had friends, yourself included, who thought I was narcoleptic that semester because like if I sat down, I fell asleep. Like I'd be mid conversation, my head would just knock back and I'd fall asleep.
I
Um,
found you in the food court asleep one time. I don't know
yeah,
if you remember that, but
100%.
I've yeah.
Everywhere. I'd fall asleep everywhere. But what I found is that the busier I get, the better I am. And so
Mhm.
like the more and it not so much of like a fake busy, but like truly, truly busy. Like I've got a lot
Mhm.
on the agenda today. Like I'm gonna be really, really efficient. Because for me, I realized there wasn't a minute waste. So there wasn't a minute for me to just get on my phone and scroll through Facebook or YouTube or, kick around on Amazon or whatever. It's like, no, no, no. I've only got 15 minutes before this next meeting and I have these 2 people I told I'd call back before X time. And so I don't have a choice. And so for me, with our daughter and my wife still works, like she comes home from daycare and we only have about a 2 to 2.5 hour window before she's falling asleep. And so it's like, all right, this is all the time I'm getting. So everything else can wait. Like I think it's just a thing of like, you just realize like in the grand scheme of things, like all that other stuff can wait. Like that person calling you to just talk about like, oh, it's a rough week or hey, it can wait. I'd call you back at 8 o'clock. Like it can wait, or it can wait till tomorrow morning when I'm driving into work. Like it can 100% wait. Um, and I think a lot of it is just, I know that you in particular know this, but like as we get older and frankly we lose the people around us, like you become much more aware of time. Um, and the meaningfulness of it. And like, I don't think it hit me until like truly, truly hit me until more recently, but that's always something my parents have kind of pounded into me. Just like be diligent with your time and don't waste it. Like it's so easy to just waste your time and it's the most valuable thing you have. So I think some of it's just, we all waste time, but just being intentional.
Yeah, I mean, I think being tracking your time, I think, is one of the most important things you can do for yourself, right? And you know
which I'm
my opinions
terrible
on.
about.
eh,
Terrible.
well, we all have our struggles, right? But
Yeah.
for me, I think it's I I like you was raised, to value my time, and the biggest motivator of that, not to be morbid, brother, but my dad had me in his mid 40s,
And
and I was always raised with him saying we are not going to have as much time together, and we didn't. I lost my dad at 20 when I was 27,
yeah.
and it's trying to make the most of that time that I have with my family is important. And I'm still bad about it. Like, again, I get sucked into this. I work 6 days a week, but every week nonstop. I haven't even taken a 6 day in over 3 years, right? So it's for me, it's that is how consumed I get in my work. And I'll tell you why in a second, why I'm that consumed by it. But at the same time, when I'm off, I'm off. And
Hmm.
I don't even have my work email on my phone anymore. And that bothers people when I tell them that. But when I'm off, I'm off. And I think what I've gotten relatively good at doing is when I finish my work day, I do my follow up emails. I do it all then. I don't kind of, get lazy and be a half ass and put it off to the next day. I keep myself accountable no matter how tired I am, get all my notes in our CRM, get everything emailed out, double check my day for the next day to see if I need to send any reminder, text or emails to those folks that I'm speaking with. I make sure all that's handled before I go to bed each night. So when I get up for the roughly hour I have with my kids in the morning before they go to school, they get that full hour with me. And then when they get home, unfortunately, I'm already working when they get home. I basically work 4 to midnight. But when they get home, anytime that I have a call that, cancels or no shows, if we don't have overflow available, I'll take the time to go downstairs and be with my family. And then Saturday and Sunday, it's fully my family, right? My wife and my kids get my undivided attention
Hmm.
Saturday and Sunday. Nothing else, interferes with that. And I think it's we all have to adapt our schedules to our family. And I got some really good advice recently. Sometimes I feel like I've missed certain things about like my oldest, and I certainly have, but we chose to be here. We can either continue to focus on what we've missed or continue to accept the choices we made to be here and make decisions on how we can prioritize, what's important to us going forward. And that's what I choose to do.
Well, and I think the other thing that I know you're aware of because we've had conversations about it, but it's like it's also knowing about the long term and not looking at the immediate like this month right now. And
Yep.
it's funny because there's um, a guy I know a little bit older than us in Nashville who's been a lifelong salesman. You don't know him, but he recently put something online about he's traveled on average 100 days a year for the last like 15 years, and his kids are like 12 and 10, I want to say.
Hmm.
Um, and he's gotten to where now he's done traveling. Like he's changed roles, he's changed capacities, but it's like he did that to put money into the bank that he can then pull from later. In the sense of like he set himself up for a long term of like, okay, now I can really spend all my time with these kids and almost work in like a part-time capacity.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's like as dads and as breadwinners, it's like sometimes you have to make that decision where it's like, hey, yeah, I'd rather be there with that kid, but it's like I gotta go make this money. Like you gotta put food on the table, you gotta pay mortgage, you gotta do these things.
You do. I mean, it's you have to. There are sacrifices.
Yeah.
Being a father, being a parent does not come without sacrifices. And some of the best advice I ever got when Megan and I were getting married was from our pastor and our premarital counseling. And I've said this before on here. He said you have to die to yourself every day. And then another buddy of mine a couple years later reminded me that applied to your kids as well. And but sometimes that means you have to forego the pleasantries for you and give them that time, so when you take that business trip, that the free time you had at home wasn't spent on you, it was spent on your kids, right? Because they deserve anything
Yeah.
before anybody else, right? And I think, it's challenging because inflation being what it is, world being what it is, things are definitely tough right now. And it's hilarious because they're like, oh, the stock market's great, the economy is great. And it's like, go check the grocery store. In a matter of 4 months, we went from $160 a month, or excuse me, $160 a week grocery bill, for two kids, and then we had our third, and it went up to like 190. Now it's 320 to 350, and that was a 4, 5 month difference. That's it. And for me, I'm looking at ways too. I think a lot of people get caught up in I have to go work these hours. I have so I can get this amount of money. I think one of the things that we as fathers can be doing is budgeting, right?
Mhm.
Because if you think about it, right, and I'm not saying this is right for everybody, but it could be applicable to some. It's if you follow a budget and you abide by that budget, could that help you not have to work and spend more time, right? It's a relative question, and then look, I mean, it's something that I myself have not always been the best about. Like we're good at maintaining and all that, but sometimes we need to be better about it. So we use an app on our phone, and it's made a significant difference in our lives and
Yeah,
my time.
we've gone through peaks and valleys as far as like actually budgeting. Like, we're both, my wife and I are both very frugal people naturally. So like we're not big spenders, but like I saw a little clip of Dave Ramsey over the weekend, who I'm not the biggest Dave Ramsey fan, but I think he's a sharp guy. Like he says a lot of really, I don't know, there's a lot of great financial advice in there.
Sure.
But he made the comment. He said something like 98% of people have never and will never do a physical handwritten budget
Hmm.
that's unique to every month. That was the caveat to it. And I went, in all the budgets I've done, I've never done one that's like unique to a specific month.
Right.
And I went, that is interesting. Like it's an interesting thought. And you're right. It's like, hey, instead of just continually upping your income to then up your lifestyle to continue to force you on that thing, it's like, are you actually paying attention to where your money is going and watching every
Exactly.
dollar? And that's, Jordan and I have had some of that conversation where it's like, with just what's going on and inflation in the world and all, it's like, hey man, what do you want to choose to do with your money? What do you want to do with this long term? It's like, do you want to invest in real estate? Do you want to go in the stock market? Like, what do you want to do with this? Because it's like your future
Hmm.
depends on it. But yeah, I don't know. It's a tough world, and it's a constant pull. But it's like I think the big thing is just being intentional with your time and not.
Yep.
And I'm as guilty as anyone about mindlessly zoning out on my phone. And my wife will be like, she'll be talking away in the corner saying something, and she'll be like, "Hey, what do you think?" And I'm like, I don't know what the question was. Like I totally missed
Exactly.
that. We all do it.
Yeah.
Um, but we could all be better too about just putting the phone down and putting it
Yeah.
on
Limiting it.
do not
Yeah.
disturb and throwing the thing down. I'm very limited to that in my job and what I do because it's like we'll get into it, but running a sales team, like that's just not an option most of the time for me anymore.
No.
So
Well, how have you made that transition from being full-time sales to now being this? I mean, being the manager of the team, and actually, let's take a step back here. I mean, you just didn't manage a team. You developed a whole new market. So you relocated from Virginia to Huntsville, Alabama, and opened up a whole new division for your organization.
yeah, so it's really cool. My company's great. Um, they they open the doors very much for people, and they've always said, "Hey, we have a lack of talent, not a lack of money." And
Mhm.
so they've always said, hey, if there's a market you want to go open up and it makes sense on paper for us, like we'll go open it. And that's basically what happened with Huntsville. I mean, it was, I had dinner with the president of the company amongst, a bunch of there were 15 other people there, but he asked me at dinner one night and he said, where do you want to be? And I just told him Alabama. And he said, all right, where specifically? And we had thought about Birmingham, but there was already somebody opening Birmingham in a couple of months. And I said, well, I had Mobile and Huntsville in mind. And he looked at the guy who does it and said, well, let's make it happen. And like literally 5 months later, we were opening up I don't know, 7,000 square foot facility. I mean, we've got like just a massive facility and we do fantastic. I mean, we'll do somewhere 9, $10 million this year in sales. And it's like
And that particular location's been open how long now?
last year, April. Yeah, last year April. So we've Huntsville's been a killer market for us. It's been one of the best new markets we've opened. I can't remember where we finished last year as far as relative to other offices under a year, but we were in the top five. And we opened up, I think, 14, 15.
Yeah.
And this year we've been out of 65 offices, we're a top 15 office in the company. And so
Yeah.
it's like, we can go toe to toe with anybody. And I tell my guys that all the time. I'm like, guys, you have one of the most unique markets in a good way in the
Mm-hmm.
country. Like, this is an
Yeah.
awesome market to live. There's a reason that people want to live in Huntsville.
Yeah.
So it's
Well, I
been
mean, you've
exciting.
got,
It has been a weird transition though, of like basically just being given the keys and being like, all right, figure it out. And I say all the time that it's like, hey, you get to open and run a business without the risk of losing your own everything on it.
right.
I'm playing with another person's checkbook, but it's like they put a ton of faith in me. At the end of the day, I've always just managed it how I would if it was my own dollar, as much as
Yeah.
possible at least, and gone, hey, is this a smart business decision or not? And it's one of the same things I preach to my guys all the time. It's like, hey, even if you're wrong, like, stick to your guns and follow through. And I
Yeah.
don't mean like, if you're totally wrong, like, just be stubborn and hard headed and don't redirect. But it's like, hey, sometimes you have to pick a course, and in order to do it justice, you just got to follow it through, man. And
Yeah.
you just got to like go and execute
Yeah.
and do the best you can with it. And so I think there's a lot to be said to just the companies out there who just identify people that maybe they're not the perfect ideal candidate on paper, but they're like, hey, this is just an intelligent person who's a problem solver, and I want them in my organization. And I think that's the one thing my company's really good at. Like, one of the many,
So,
but yeah.
in that regard, what do you put value on when you're hiring your team? I mean, and for the record, how big is the team that you've built now? How many people do you have working
I've
for you?
I have 10 sales reps, and then I have I don't know, total personnel it's like 18.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, fairly large. By no means is it like 100-person kind of thing. It's
Yeah.
it's
No,
manageable.
no, I
But
gotcha.
but I'm sorry. Repeat the question. You had one there, and
Just, what do y'all place value
oh
on in that hiring process? Because I think one of the best piece of advice is, my gosh, one of the best pieces of advice I think I ever got was, build a relationship from the very start, right? So, are you going to hire people that are going to be a robot, or are you going to hire people that, and that robot, for the record, may have all the business acumen on
hmm
paper, that may have gone to Booth, Chicago, business school, right? But can they interact? Can they establish trust?
yeah, it's a good question. Like, honestly, you know, my guys, in the way we do things, it's a full commission job. All right, so that has to be prefaced. So realistically, if 50% of who you hire is truly like really good and they stick around, you're one of the best hirers in this industry in general. Like, it's
Right.
just the nature of the beast is there's a lot of turnover, and that's sales to some extent, but especially when you get into 100% commission, like, you have a rough couple of months, and you know either we're gonna have to let go of you, or you're gonna have to let go of us more than likely. Um, but for me, my interviewing's a little different in that one of my biggest goals is I try to not ever blue sky anybody, meaning that, like, I want to give them the good, the bad, and the ugly from day one. Like, I don't want them to ever come back to me and go, well, hey, you promised me X, Y, and Z, and this, that, and the other. So I want to be super upfront with them, and I want to just get to know who they are as a person. And if I think they're an intelligent, well-spoken person, then I'm kind of just getting to know, like, can they make a friend? If you can do that, I think you can do this job. Because I think in a lot of ways, that's what sales boils down to. As far as initially, it's like, can you just make a friend? If you can make a friend at the door, like, that's half the battle. And that's, frankly, it's probably the hardest part of the battle. Like, I don't know about you, but like, teaching someone who can't just walk up to someone and strike up conversation, keep that conversation going, is one of the most, I found that to be an incredibly difficult skill to teach. And
Much so.
and so, I talk about this with people all the time, and I'm always trying to like find a way to get to a certain piece of information. And my most recent one, and I'll be interested if you have an answer to this. My most recent one is, if I could get people to answer honestly, one of the questions I most want to know from people is, if you go to the grocery store and there's not a cart return,
Turn the car.
within 20 feet that you can see,
Take it all the way back.
are you going to take it back or do you just leave it in an empty spot right there? Because that to me tells me what kind of person you are.
Everything.
But nobody
It
will
does.
answer that honestly. And I've yet to find a way to ask that question in a way that I can get a truly honest answer.
Yeah.
But that's kind of, I think in essence, like it sounds super goofy, but like that's what I found of what I'm looking for. Like, do you do the right thing when nobody else is looking? Are you willing to do
No,
the work?
it shows value, right? It shows moral compass
Yeah.
and value to some degree, right? Do you value doing the job correctly, starting and finishing, as you should versus half-assing it, right?
Yeah.
And like the other day, Megan and I were at the grocery store. We pull into Publix where we live, and there's an individual, a lady that's in a pickup truck, gets out of her, doesn't get out. She finishes loading her truck. She's maybe in her 40s, healthy, fit, and
Doesn't
wheels
return
that
that cart.
cart right in front of my wife's car and just stop, kind of does the little, the left and the right, and just back to her car. And I just stared at her. I just looked out the driver's side door, and I stared at her, and she's like, look at me like, what? She drives around, she gave me the bird, right? And it's like that type of crap drives me nuts because they're satisfied half-assing something and then letting somebody else pick up the slack for them.
And I think that's also like kind of the culture of the day where like
Yep.
you call someone out on their crap and then they're pissed. They have the nerve to throw you the bird for something. And it's like, hey, just do the right thing. Do the right thing when nobody's looking. Do the extra work. It's what you were talking about. Like, hey, I don't care what time it is. You get done at midnight, 11 o'clock, 1 a.m., whatever. Hey, I'm going to finish this instead of putting it off until 8 in the morning because I told somebody I was going to. Like, I'm sure, and I'm sure there's people at your company do. I'm sure that if you wanted to, you could just get up and do that at 8 o'clock in the morning, and no one would really ever be any the wiser to it in a sense. But it's like, is that what I committed to doing? Or did I commit to doing it as soon as I got off the call and have it to you,
Exactly.
2 hours after we're done? And so it's super tough, but like hiring, it's a weird thing. I told my wife the other day, I understand like the longer I do this, unfortunately, the more jaded I become.
Yeah.
And because like I give people opportunities that frankly like don't necessarily deserve them or don't deserve them yet. And it blows up in my face more often than not. And I think there's a part of me that sees some of myself in these people where I'm like, oh man, I wish somebody would have given me this opportunity. But not everyone's going to do what I was willing to do or what you were willing to do. And so it's becoming harder and harder for me to go out of my way to give people these opportunities who aren't deserving. But I think my wife sort of keeps me grounded because I'll talk to her about these interviews and she typically gives pretty good advice on, hey, you should hire this person or hey, maybe you should wait on this person. And so it's nice to have.
Good wife is a good compass. That's something I've heard said a lot.
That's a
It's true,
great
man.
statement.
It's true. I mean, my wife is my compass. And look, we've had our ups and downs. I mean, I think any long-time marriage is going to, and I'm not a saint by any means, but she puts up with a lot. But at the end of the day, she is my compass for sure. But I mean, I think something you said there in our role, especially, training people, you've got to be able to call people out. And something I'm looking for is, can they take that feedback? I'm not trying to break you down to hurt you. I'm trying to help you. And unfortunately, and I'm getting salty now. I'll turn 36 here in a few days, but I think I'm starting to see more and more people just are not open to, helpful feedback, right? I'm not even being critical. I'm just trying to say, hey, this is awesome. Let's keep building upon that. Like, well, it wasn't perfect. Well, no, nothing's ever perfect, right? And so I remember there was a situation a long time ago before I was actually in a physical product sales role, when I was still in the consulting sales world, and an individual at an event it was an in-person event. An individual had lost their phone, and I asked a team member to get up and start looking around. They just remained sitting on the couch and didn't join. And it's like, okay, got it. And so the
Mental
fact
note.
that I took it, Exactly, right? Well, later on, I made a comment about that, and I said, "Hey, like this to me was unacceptable." I got reeled into management for it, not the individual that sat on her ass. I got reeled into management for calling someone out. Apparently, it's not appropriate to call someone out for not being a team player. And it's like I didn't go to management. I didn't go rat her out. I just said, "Hey, can you step up here and help us look for this individual's phone before they have to board a flight?" And it's people cannot take any type of feedback these days. I feel like that, whether it's to be helpful or whether it's just to spur reaction, someone actually does their job and they go from 0 to 100, I think, all too quick. And what I'm looking for when I'm trying to, help people that are onboarding is I'm trying to figure out who's going to listen or who's going to talk, right?
Mhm.
And I know you hire a lot of guys with sales experience. And the last thing I want to hear about is how successful you were at your last position. You left for a reason, right? And you may have been very successful, but you left for a reason. All I care about is what you're going to do here. Can you shut up and can you learn the product that we sell? That's all I care about.
Yeah, it is funny in that way. And I tell people like we do a lot of like daily check-ins and talking about previous day appointments and role plays. And so I tell them, I'm like, hey man, I say it almost every day. I'm like, you got to leave your ego at the door.
Yes.
I don't care if you've been here for 2 weeks or 2 years, you got to leave your ego at the door because like this is a place where we're all here to get better. You know, um, one of the cool things about I love it, our company at every level, people are paid on a performance level in some sense. So call it commission, call it bonuses, whatever you want. But everyone has an incentive to do better. And so I tell everyone, I'm like, hey, look, whether you hate me or love me or you're anywhere in between, I want you to be successful. I don't care what I think about you. I don't care what you think about me. It's like I make money when my entire team is selling, you included. And so there's
Yep.
nothing I'm going to say in here that's ever intended to hurt you. It's just to bring you up. And so I think sometimes people aren't willing to have that kind of first conversation of like, what is the purpose of this feedback? And then
Mhm.
I think you're right in that, like when you're talking about the plane thing and getting called to HR and whatever, I see that a lot where like the bigger a company gets, the more careful they have to get in a way that's like
Mhm.
overprotective. And so you can't say anything to anyone about anything because God forbid one word is a little off. And so I don't know, it's again, it's one of those things where I think if you have the conversation about the intent of why the feedback is coming, especially if it's someone you work with on a regular basis, I think it opens that up a little bit more. And especially if you can just ask them like, hey, how do you feel about taking feedback? How do you like getting feedback? Because that's something like I've noticed a lot of people, I'll ask them that and they're like, what are you talking? Like they don't realize there's multiple ways to get feedback. Like no one's ever asked them that question. And so, unfortunately, we've all seen it, but it's like there's a lot of really, really, really bad sales managers and middle management out there that are just kind of like poison the well a little bit. And so you have to like, gosh, I can remember the worst one. Like I had a guy one time, he had a family member pass away, and he didn't think I would give him like 3 days off to go to the funeral out of state. And I was like, what do you, like he was asking, I was like, of course, do you want, I like offered like, hey, do you just want to take off till next Monday? And it was like 6 days. And he was like, wait, that's okay. And I was like, dude, yes. Like you had a you had an immediate family member die. Like, yes, take the time you need to like go and grieve and be with family and stuff. He goes, oh, I didn't even think, and no one's ever offered me. Like, apparently something happened in the past where there was a funeral and he got fired because he left for 2 days. And I'm like, what an insane, I don't know. There's just no empathy anymore in the world.
No, there's not. I mean, don't get me wrong. We work in organizations that are, are y'all public or y'all private?
We're private. Yeah. So we
Okay.
have a pretty large private equity stake.
Okay.
Um, being a private company, they don't have to disclose all of it. So I'm obviously not sure of the details. I'm not the lead accountant, but
Right.
no, we are still a private company, and I
Yeah.
don't.
So are we.
Yeah, and so that I think that brings with it a lot of benefits, though.
It does. Yeah.
It's we've grown a ton since I started with this company. I think when I first talked to you about coming on board this company just a couple of years ago, it's like we were less than half the size of we are today. But HR has built up in suit, and there have been some new procedures and policies put in place, and most of it being very, very good, like needed stuff. But it does kind of, it puts a little bit more guardrails on everything, and it keeps you in the boundaries. And but it's cool that our company still allows us to like do business the way it needs to be done, I guess. Just do the
Yeah.
right thing, treat people how they need to be treated.
I think when you value your workforce, you value your team, you're not
Yeah.
going to see as much turnover. And I think some you're going to see turnover in positions that are people just don't learn the product, and they just really struggle to learn its good sales technique, right? But at the end of the day, for those that are more than halfway decent at their job, you're less likely to lose them by taking care of your team and listening to their needs. And I think hats off to you, man, because I have heard of other situations similar to what you described where someone is let go or they're only given a single day, and it's like, well, I can get down and back in a day to certain spots in the country, right?
You
And
know,
so it's important.
it, yeah, it, it's just it's a funny world in that regard. And like, I think one of the biggest things that's a struggle as we talk about just all of this together in hiring and sales, and particularly in the sales aspect of hiring, is that there's so many jobs that have the title of sales in some way, and they're not sales.
Yeah.
They're order taking, or they're marketing, or they're customer service. And so people get confused with the difference between being an order taker and being a salesman. And so that's one of the hardest things I find to even we do a 2 interview process, but even if I get 2 hours with the guy to find out, like, can he truly sell something? Like, because I mean, frankly, I'll say it, like, the bulk of my experience when I was at Verizon coming out of college was order taking. Like, there was a little bit of
Right.
salesmanship, but it was order taking. And I knew in that role, like, I learned quickly, we had a busy location. The more people I could touch in a day, the more potential sales I could get to. And my limitation was how many hours I was allowed to work, because they didn't want you pulling a bunch of overtime. And so it was like, okay, if I can just get a little bit faster and still treat the customer right and do the things I need to do, but get a little bit quicker in here, then I can see two, three, four, five more customers a day.
Yep.
But when you get into like truly sales, and it's not just selling on price and payment or whatever, hey, we're building it's a value proposition. It's a long-term investment.
Yep.
Dude, that's just a different ball game. And a lot of people, they think they know what they're getting into, and then they get into it and they're like, this is harder than I
Mhm.
realized. And that's one of the biggest things I feel like I see people struggle with. Now, that might not be the case everywhere, but in what we do, that's a big struggle.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely, I think, something that I see people struggle with on my side of the spectrum as well. But I think for me too, I'll just be honest, man. I don't think some people want to work as badly as others. But one of the reasons why I think I've been bad in recent years about creating that difference, for myself in time, is because I've been laid off for 7 months before, right? I was with an organization that had to let go a third of its company, and I was the division that got let go. And you spend 7 months, sitting in a dark home contemplating, you're failing and letting your family down because you're not providing food on the table. You've got a newborn, just over a year old, and you've got, we found out a month after, um, I was, laid off that, we were expecting our second at the time. Like, I never want to, experience that again. I think some people, you get nervous about putting food on the table or keeping a roof over your head as a father or as a parent in general. I mean, for me, there's no better motivation than that. And I'm a firm believer in, if you just try, if you keep putting the effort in, you're going to eventually figure it out. I really do believe it. You're going to have to get guidance. You're going to have to get tips. You're going to have to listen. You're going to have to listen and learn. But if you can listen and learn and keep putting the effort in, you will figure it out. You may not like it, but you will figure out how to be, at least do well enough to provide a living for yourself.
Yeah, I think there's scales to it, but yeah, I don't disagree with you. It's not a coincidence that I'm sure you see it too. Like, you see the sales guy who has a job and maybe he's struggling and he doesn't know how he's going to pay rent that's due in 2 weeks, and magically he becomes the best salesman in that place.
Yep.
And like, I see it all the time. I'm sure you see it, but like, I'll have a guy that's kind of had a slump and all of a sudden some bills are coming due
Yep.
and he goes out and sells 3 deals in 4 days and he's making a lot of money. He's covering bills for a couple months. And then all of a sudden he goes right back into another slump because it's like,
Comfortable.
it's that saying, and I've seen it a lot here recently. I think it's true it's a bunch of lines. I'm going to butcher it, but good times create weak, weak men, weak times
Mm-hmm.
create, you know what I'm talking about, or
Yeah.
soft
Yeah.
times, weak
Yeah.
men, whatever it is. But, sometimes you got to go through some hardship and some adversity and you got to be pushed around a little bit, and you kind of have to get a little bit of that desperation and come out swinging a little bit. And I want to see people to have that fight. Like, I want to see people that are, they're not going to take it sitting down. Like, they want to get better and they want to get after it. Like, I want to see a little bit of that fire burning in them.
Yeah. No, I wish that I saw more of that. I mean, obviously not everyone's going to have it, right? I get that. But I do wish, I just think take ownership of your situation, right? If you can take ownership of your situation and understand, hey, at the end of the day, it comes down to you, right? You, the person, whatever situation you're in. Sometimes it's not preventable. Sometimes it's things that you couldn't control. My situation being laid off was out of my control. The company was
Yeah.
not financially sound. But it was in my control as soon as in terms of applying to jobs and finding jobs, in becoming successful, right? And learning that new product and doing well with it. And I think it's, if you can hold yourself accountable, set a standard for yourself and increase that standard, right? I think if you get too comfortable, you're not going to grow in your job. And if you're not growing, what are you doing? And that's a personal opinion, but
Yeah.
you need to be growing. And in my opinion, you should be setting new standards. And I think that's something that some sales teams get wrong, is once they get someone to a certain level, they don't give them any more resources to continue growing, right? And I think that's where management teams across the country could do a better job. And I think that would also make employees happier because they can learn something, maybe a new skill.
But if we take that thought, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. If you take that
Yeah.
thought, I think there's a deeper reason for that. I think the reason they stop, and I don't think it's out of choice. I think it's because those are the hardest people to give quality training to.
Yeah, I
And
agree with that.
and
I
I
can
and
totally
I
agree with
think that they run into that wall of like, oh my gosh, like we've gotten them kind of as high as we can get them, and I don't know that we can
that.
do
Mm-hmm.
more. And like,
Yeah.
I see that all the time where we have really high level guys doing what we're doing, and I mean, we work in primarily roofing, but do windows and other exterior home remodeling. And I mean, there's guys out here making just insane amounts of money, but it's because they are really, 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 really good salesmen. And at a certain point, it does get hard to train them because you look at them and you're like, crap, man, you're as good or better than me. Like, but so there is a humility aspect. At least I think there's a humility aspect in like understanding that just because you're good at a bunch of things doesn't mean there's not other places where we can still do improvement. And it also doesn't mean that I can't learn from you. So one of the things I
Exactly.
tell people all the time is like, when I do, new onboarding and basic trainings, I learn stuff from guys all the time. Like, I learn little one-liners, or I learn about something that somebody just happens to have a random background. And I'm like, oh, I'll be darned, didn't know that. I think you just have to be open to learning from anyone. And
I agree.
I think for me, that's one of the reasons why, like, it all kind of comes full circle. I told you, like, I enjoy teaching. Like, it's always been fun for me, but I think part of the reason why is because I enjoy meeting a lot of people, and part of the reason for that is because I think everyone has a really interesting story to tell, but most people won't take the time to listen.
I think something I heard from a very close friend of mine and someone I want to have on the show, he's actually one of my former VPs. He told me every time he took a new opportunity to sit down, I'm on calls.
Mhm.
My sales role is done over video chat, um, in other in person events. But he told me, he's like, I just look at this like having a cup of coffee. If I can't sit down and listen to their needs and get to know them and actually be able to give them a more unique response or service to their particular need, I'm not going to be successful. And just I shorten that to just have a cup of coffee, right? Like when I'm sitting down with a new potential client, my first 10 to 15 minutes, I'm not trying to push a sale. I'm not trying to talk funds, money. I'm just trying to get to know them where I can build a little bit of rapport. They feel comfortable and they start, he's listening. Okay. He cares. And I think we need more of that, right? It's funny enough, like, I work with a lot of people, looking for service consulting, right? And so I'll get on these calls, and a lot of these individuals will get on and it's like, hey, how you doing? Good.
Yeah, real cagey.
It's like, yeah, it's like, I'm doing great too. Thanks for asking, And it's just like this, hey, you signed up for the call. What's going on? And if you rush that family or, that potential client, if you rush them in that moment and they're kind of standoffish, giving you those one word responses, you're losing it immediately. You've got to lower the gates and
Yeah,
get in.
I'm big on it's funny you made the coffee or the comment about coffee, because I tell my guys all the time that when I'm giving a pitch to somebody or I'm meeting with somebody, this is going to sound really weird, so bear with me. I
You're
always
good.
try to imagine it's like if somebody that I haven't seen in 15 years but I used to know is buying a product in whatever category I'm in, and we're just sitting down at Waffle House having breakfast together. And I try to bring that level of like where I'm at as far as, hey, I'm not really pushing this on you. I want to educate you on it. I think you're a smart person, but maybe you don't have all the information at your disposal. And I'm pretty confident that when I lay everything out in front of you, I'm not really going to have to quote unquote sell you a whole bunch of anything. Because once I've educated you and you can see everything, I think you're going to lean my way more often than not. And so I always joke with you, I'm like, hey man, go out and make a friend. Go out and make a friend.
Yep.
But like there is a lot of truth to that, of like his thing of going out and having a cup of coffee, because it's like, hey, just bring down the walls a little bit and be a real human for a minute. Because so often like guys just
Exactly.
want to blitz right into like, for us it's like, oh, so
Yep.
why'd you have us out? You haven't leaks, you haven't this yet. And I'm like, hey, just talk to him for a minute. Like, get to know the person you're sitting in front of.
Yeah, it's like you don't know what kind of day that person's had, right? It's like you go to the grocery store, you buy whatever you're buying. It's like, hey, how's your day? Oh, it's good. Yeah. So you gonna get some time off with your family here? Like my wife used to kind of stare at me. He's like, what? It's like, because I care, because you don't know what the other person's going through. In our role specifically, if you do exactly what you just said, it's like, so you're having roof leaks, you got all these issues. It's like, hey, my mom just died. And it's like, hey, let's redo this, right?
Yeah.
It's like, and I'm not trying to be extreme there with that example, but you just don't know. And if you just come in the slimy, greasy salesperson that everyone tries to put a bad rap to for anybody in sales, you're not helping yourself. So it's situational awareness. Not to sound like a prepper here, but situational awareness applies to sales. You need to be aware of what that prospective, client is showing, right? You need to be able to read any cards they're giving you before you make any kind of forward progression to try to get an opportunity for yourself.
Yeah, it's fine.
And I think too many of us get sucked in.
This is a conversation. This is a rabbit hole that goes so deep too that it's like you get any guys who've been in sales for a long time, and it's like this is a conversation that I feel like could go on for hours and hours and
Oh,
hours
for
and
sure.
hours and hours. But it's a that's I think that's part of it. Like when you asked me early on of like, why sales, it's like I think that's why. Is
Yeah.
it's kind of the never ending cycle. So like on a personal level, like I'm a big golfer, and I know you play. You're not a big golfer, but you've played. And there's an old quote about how, and I think it relates to sales, about golf it very much mimics and mirrors the game of life, and that
Mm-hmm.
you can hit a great shot and get a bad bounce and have a terrible lie, or you can hit a terrible shot, it bounces off the tree, lands in the middle of the fairway, all fluffed up, nice, beautiful lie. But it's like at the end of the day, you got to play the ball where it lies. Like, can't go back and redo that last shot. Can't go back and redo that last appointment. I can't, take my foot out of my mouth that I just put in there in the last 15 minutes of the customer. It's like all I can do is move forward. And so I tell guys, I'm like, hey man, like if you made a mistake, it's okay. Like that's
Yeah.
fine, but just own it and move on. Like own it,
Yep.
learn from it, move on. Like it's
Yep.
all you can do. You cannot just keep looking in the rearview mirror forever, because you're never going to get anywhere that way.
You can't live in the past. It's going to prevent you from growing to the future. So,
Yeah.
kind kind of transitioning there. So how do you define your success, right? I think society as a whole now, I call it the brag board. That's kind of my slang term,
Yeah.
around the house, Instagram, Facebook. And granted, I have all those things, but I mainly put up family photos now, but obviously have to use that to try to grow this podcast to create a community. But how do you define success versus what society tries to tell you is success?
Um, I think to me it's the people and the relationships. So like obviously I think there's a base component. Like I think you'd be foolish if you sat there and said like, "Oh, I'm super successful," and you're homeless. Like I mean maybe in some capacity you are, depending on what your definition of success is, but that doesn't work for me. Um, I think for me, being able to see that like my family is taken care of is a big deal. I
Mm-hmm.
think being able to see like the pride in family members and hear how they talk about me or my career or whatever I'm doing, and then frankly the people that I manage. So you know I've had on numerous occasions people come to me and like a couple of guys who left for various reasons, family, whatever, and said, "Hey man, this has nothing to do with you. You're the best boss I've ever had." And it's like, sometimes you take that with a grain of salt because you're like, well, if you're making a lot more money, I don't know if you believe in me, but maybe I'm not the best boss, but at the same time, it's like, I think those kind of things go a long way. And I think, um, yeah, I've never been, I don't know. I think all of us are materialistic to some extent. Like I like nice things. I like fun things. We have a shared passion in some things, but it's like, what's the I don't know. I think it's a Darius Rucker song or something about like I've got a roof over my head, shoes under my feet, food to
Yeah.
eat,
Mm-hmm.
something
Yeah.
along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, that actually brought me to a really, I haven't said this in a long time. I kind of forgot about it. But the comedian Brian Callen.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so Brian Callen, he's a really funny guy, but he had this great line that I thought related, and it sort of changed my outlook a few years ago. Somebody asked him what success was or what enough was. Like what's the
Mm-hmm.
line of like enough money? And I think that's exact. I can't remember exactly how they phrased the question, but he said, if I can take my family out to eat and not pay attention to the prices on the menu and not be concerned about what they're going to order,
Yep.
that's success to me. He's like,
I love that.
I've provided. He's like, everything else is extra. It's fluff, it's the cherry on top. And I was like, oh man, that's actually a really good line. Because in my mind, like I immediately read it, I'm like, well, you're not doing that if you're not paying rent, if you can't put clothes on your back. So it's like, all right, you get to the point where I think a lot of us would be like, oh, success is way more than that. But I'm like, no, man, that's sometimes we get caught up in the rat race. And I'm like, that's it. Like if you can provide for your family and be comfortable and not have to, have all your bills on auto draft and not have to worry about how you're going to pay for dinner, dude, you're living well.
Better than probably 90% of the world.
Yeah, and it's like don't get me wrong, I'd love to have a Porsche 911 sitting out front, but it's like I don't need that to have success. Like I'd love to have one, but it's like that's not success at the end of the day. Like
Maybe one day when the majority of your responsibilities have been met, right? Maybe one day, but it's not something that we need now. Could we have it now? Sure. But do we need it now? No. Would love to have one, but at the end of the day, you're right. It's not success. I think success is I think people think they're failing because they get too sucked in what others have. I think you're spot on with your materialism comment. And it's at the end of the day, more shit brings more problems. And you've got more responsibilities, more time consumption. And I mean, there's just so much that, starts to, just slowly pick at your time and take away from your time the more you have. And less, and this is something I'm learning, less totally is more. I mean, it is the greatest feeling to kind of purge a bunch of stuff from your home and not have as much stuff sitting around. We did that recently. It feels amazing. But
yeah,
I think
I
I think living your own dream, like what's important to you. I agree with what you're saying about Brian Callen. It's not It's not what, this famous influencer saying you need to have. It's what makes you happy, what you're comfortable with. Are your family members taken care of?
And I think that, I mean, you talked about it a little bit at the very beginning. I've I haven't had Instagram on my phone for probably a year.
You're brave.
And so it's funny how it happened. I changed, I've been an Android guy for the longest time, and I went to Apple when my wife got pregnant, not long after. I needed a new phone anyway. But I went to it largely because of FaceTime, because all of our immediate family lives out of the city that we're in. They're not in Huntsville. So I was like, all right, with having a newborn, that FaceTime tool is a huge advantage. And frankly, I was the only one not with an Apple device. And so I
That one guy.
I know I was that one guy keeping the group text green. But it's funny, when I did that, I just never re-downloaded it. I couldn't remember the password or whatever. Instead of doing a forget thing, I just am not on it. And like, I have Facebook, but frankly I only use it for marketplace. Like, that's my dumb, like, I'm scrolling through, my mindless nothingness.
Yep.
But I found myself being happier with what I have since getting off of those things, because the old line of like, comparison is the thief of joy. Like, I don't care what somebody else has. Like, I don't care that I have the money to go out and buy whatever. Like, it doesn't matter to me. It's like, I don't feel any necessity to go out. And it's funny, I look over, I've got my watch sitting here, and I took it off a few minutes ago. And this is a great example. I don't know, I know you're a big watch guy too.
I'm going to ask you about your watch in a minute, so you better put that on.
Yeah, so it's funny. I don't know that you know this, but so looks, but it's not, looks like an Omega Speedmaster.
Is that the Omega Swatch
It
partnership watch?
is.
I love that
And
watch.
so I got it because I was just curious, and I actually found one at retail. I didn't have to pay a markup on it, which,
Really?
yeah, crazy. And I just slapped a
Okay.
black rubber strap on it.
Mm-hmm.
Farrell, you're a watch guy. I'm a bit of a watch guy. I have had so many people think this was a Speedmaster. And I go, oh, it's only about 1/20th the price. But I go, hey, guess what? It tells time great. It looks fantastic.
It does.
I love wearing it. Frankly, everyone I hand it to, even big watch guys who see it, they're like, this is a cool watch. Like,
It is.
and it's like, it's really easy to get sucked into like, oh, you got to have the Rolex, you got to have the Tudor, you got to have the whatever. And I'm like, get what makes you happy, man. If a $30 Casio makes you happy, like, get your Casio. And this is the only Swatch I've ever owned, but it's become almost a daily wear for me.
Yeah.
Anytime.
Well, I mean, I think tracking your time is the most important thing you can do for yourself, because it allows you to effectively use your time.
Yeah.
Right. So it's incredibly important, but how you track it. I mean, if someone's happy tracking on their iPhone, great. But I really do believe in having a watch. I do, because there's times in iPhone I can't be subtle about it. Right. And but I agree. Like, yeah, I mean, I'm wearing a Rolex right now, but it's, this was a Rolex that was my dad's. Now I have some other very nice watches that I bought myself, but that's something I'm very passionate about, like automatic watches. But at the same time, one of my favorite things to wear is just my Apple Watch, right? And so it's, there are things that I've chosen to invest my money in, not because of what I've seen on Instagram. I bought my first watch when I was just turning 18. I got it my senior year in high school. I bought a Tag Heuer Link.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, holy crap, dude. Like, what are you buying a watch? I've been into them that long, right? Now it's a fad. Everybody's wearing these super fancy watches. But to me, it's not what watch you wear. It's what makes you happy, right? As long as you're tracking your time and you're happy, that's more than enough.
So I told you it's sitting at home, and I still have it set aside, but my parents have always emphasized the meaning of time. And I didn't know it before it happened, but they gave me and all my siblings a really nice watch as a high school graduation gift. And they'd given me a tag. And it's still, I either wear this Omega Swatch or I wear that tag basically every day. But they had written this really very heartfelt note about the meaning of time and don't let a minute slip away. And at the time, it's hard to know. When you're 18, you think you're king of the world, and you're the grand poobah and nobody's gonna touch you. But like, I look back at that note, not all the time. I'll pull it out. It's sitting with the tag box, but it's it's sitting in the closet, and I'll look at it once every year or so. And it's like, it's a special thing, and I think a watch does remind you of that. And I understand the people who aren't watch people. Like, I get that side too. But
Yeah,
if you are a watch person, I think it can be a really special thing, and it's not. There's something more to it than just the minute hands and the gears and the whatever. Like your watch from your dad, it's like there's so much more to that than what meets the eye. And like
exactly.
watches are a really special thing. I do, it's interesting you bringing this into kind of this sales world, because it's like obviously watches go hand in hand in the sales world with it's a show of wealth. That's what they are a lot of the time. Like you get into
To
some
a
higher
degree,
end stuff,
sure.
they're a show of wealth. Like, hey, I'm better than you.
Yeah,
But um, I think they can be very special, and
yeah.
it can be a really neat thing.
They can't, and they're a point of conversation. I mean, I closed a deal last year. The father was wearing a Rolex Daytona, and it
Mm.
was a, it watch. I have I'm very much into racing, as you know, and the McQueen Daytona is the Daytona, and he had a McQueen
Oh, that's
Daytona,
cool.
probably a real McQueen Daytona is probably, I know it's at least six figures. I think there's arguments it could go even more now. So,
Yeah.
to that end, we were talking about is like he appreciated the fact it came up how much I appreciated time, but the meaning, as you were just saying, the meaning behind the watch. Each watch tells a story.
Hmm.
You bought it for a reason, right? This is my dad's, right? It's passed down to me, and it's got his initials on it, and just so happens to be the same initials of my son. So my son will get it one day, right?
Oh, I didn't
I've got
realize
other
that.
really nice watches my daughters will get, right? And but to that end, they all have their own story. But just like, just like any other type of material possession can have its own story. But I I just don't want to. The reason I put so much value on watches is it reminds me of the most valuable asset I have, and that's the time. And one of the things that I think helps me is also understanding that it ends, and it's nothing to be afraid of. It comes for all of us, but how can you make sure that you maximize what you get out of it?
Yeah.
Being healthy, exercising, it's something I've got to be better about. But if you understand the importance of time and you value it and you track it, you're going to give more of yourself to others, your kids, your wife, and you're going to give more of it to yourself, so you can continue to give to your wife and your kids. It's important. But let me ask you this: what's coming up for you? What are you working towards? What's kind of the thing personally that you and maybe your wife are targeting and trying to move towards next?
It's an interesting question. Like, we kind of been banding around the idea of what we want to do. When you have a 6 month old at home, it's like you're kind of limited in really everything as far as like
Yeah,
what you can get out and do and whatnot. The world is starting to open up a little more to us. But yeah, I don't know, man. Like, I'm very happy in the position I'm in with my company, and that's not to say that I don't have my days of frustration. I think anyone who doesn't have days of frustration at their job doesn't care enough, is my mind.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, there's definitely frustration, but um, it's a cool opportunity. I can make an impact on people's lives, and so for me, I'm not really looking to necessarily do anything different here as far as like
hmm,
what my role or what my capacity is. Like, obviously we're always trying to grow and sell more and do better in the normal sales pitch. Um, but for my wife and I, a lot of it is kind of slowing things down. As we're seeing our daughter
hmm,
grow so quickly, it's like, oh my gosh, like she's a chunky little thing. We love her to death. She's a healthy little thing, but she's already 20, 21 pounds. And it's like, it feels like yesterday, we were laughing about how, when you have the newborn and you kind of hold them flat in your arm, and she just won't let us do that anymore. She just wants to sit up, and she kind of starts grunting at us and wants to sit up. And it's like, oh man, like
yeah,
just trying to be more intentional with our time on the weekends with her. And so
yeah,
intentionally, like, taking her places, even though it's 6 months old, it's not things she's going to remember, but like exposing her to the world and getting her with family and just getting out, being intentional with our time. But um, both of us, she's naturally more of an introvert. I'm much more an extrovert, but as I'm sure you can relate, coming home from work in a job like this, like I don't. necessarily want to just go and talk to a whole bunch of people afterwards. So I've kind of become an introvert in my home life. And so for us, it's sort of being intentional about like getting out
Mm-hmm.
um, and not letting the material world just sort of take over, because there has been that thought of like, oh, do you go try to look at a second home or a vacation home or a this or a that? And it's like, no, 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 let's pump the brakes. Don't need new cars. We don't need another home. We don't need bigger. We don't need more. We just need to enjoy what we have. And so
Yeah.
I think for us, it's that's largely become the focus. Um, you know, treasuring relationships more so than things.
Mm-hmm. Treasuring relationships with people that value relationships. Right.
Yeah, and it's so
Yeah.
hard. Like, I mean, even you and I, it's like we've known each other forever. Um,
Mm.
but it's like you never talk to these people as much as you want to. Like good friends from college and even post college, it's, you know, we have mutual friends that it's like, man, I still wish I talked to this person every day, and I'm lucky if I talk to him twice a year now. And
Are we talking about
it,
JP?
I mean, that's one of them, but there's half a dozen that come to mind, and
Sure,
and
sure,
it
sure.
and it makes me feel guilty. And like the weird
Yeah.
thing is, I'm sure you can relate to this. It takes me longer to then pick up the phone and call that person because I feel so guilty about not having called that person. And it's this vicious
Yep.
cycle that it's like, oh, it's been 6 months. I can't just call them. And then it's like, before you know it, it's been 18 months and I haven't called them. And you're like, no, I feel really guilty about just picking up. And so trying to be intentional with time and the people and like making that time, what we talked about, just being intentional every night with the family. And hey, I've got these hours, and we make sure we FaceTime the grandparents now, and be able to show them their granddaughter darn near every night, because it's like, hey, these are the special people in our lives, the friends and family that make a difference.
Yeah.
So
No, I agree. And I want to encourage you, man, to have those conversations. Try not to be worried about having to apologize, because it's, those conversations with others are, I mean, they're therapeutic. It's like, hey, you're not the only one going through this. I had a really good conversation with another close friend from Stanford the other day. I won't,
yeah,
I won't name him currently, but he was just saying like, dude, we feel stuck, and he and his wife, growing family, awesome, awesome family, great people, genuinely, good people, and wildly successful in what they do. But there's some circumstances, jobs wise, that also relevance to certain areas where they live, that prevent them from just being able to pick up and move right now. And it's and I was like, hey brother, like I'm right there with you. Like we're busting at the seams, but and we do need a slightly bigger home. I'm not looking for the big mansion, but slightly bigger home would be helpful. But I'm not doing it at an 8% interest rate, right?
yeah,
And so it's like having those conversations is a good reminder. And this is where I get caught up, right? As a father, I feel like a lot of times I feel I've let my family down, like I've done something
mm.
wrong. In the reality, we're all going through it. We just need to talk more about it. Have that community. That's what this podcast is hopefully
It's
doing.
funny too that as you say that, because like we were just seeing family in North Georgia, and it's a really old family cabin that is, I don't know how it's still standing, if I'm being honest. Like, they replaced foundation, and it was literally stacked river stone was the base of the foundation for this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but we were talking about what it used to be, and it was literally at one point one bedroom, a little like living room, kitchen, living room, dining room area, and a bathroom. And there were 5 people that
Mm-hmm.
lived there. And it's like, we get into this modern world of everyone's got to have their own 800 square foot bedroom and the private this and
Yep.
private that. And it's like,
Yep.
don't get me wrong, those things are nice to have, but are they truly a necessity in life? No.
No.
I'm
No.
often envious of the
No.
people who have just like the flip phone. Like, I'm in the same world with you
Yeah.
where like I don't have I don't have email on my phone. And so I
Yeah.
tell people, I'm like, if you need me bad enough, if it's important enough, you'd already have my cell phone, is my mindset.
Exactly.
And so I'm like, if it's important enough, if it's an email, it can wait till 8 o'clock tomorrow. Like, it can wait. Like,
Yeah.
my computer's open 8 to 5. After that, computer's shut. I'm not looking at email. Um,
Got it. Got to
but
do it.
I wish a lot of times I could go back to a flip phone day and like not have any of the distractions. But it's like, that's just not what I do.
Well, I mean, it, but we're so locked into them, right? Like you have withdrawals. I mean, have you had that fake vibration? Like you think you've had a vibration in your body and it's not a real vibration, right?
Oh yeah.
Like that's all the more reason why we have to separate from this as best as we can. And I mean, I remember not putting email on my phone, and it was, I mean, first couple of days, like I was stressed about it, right? But it's been very, very beneficial to me, right? So I hear you on that. I am envious of someone on flip phone. I can't commit to that. I'll own that right now. I have to stay a little bit more in tune, but I am trying to be more self-aware of social media consumption, screen time in general, and be present with my kids because, you know, and I want to talk briefly about North Georgia before we kind of wrap, but you go to, restaurants today and you see 20-year-olds, just, a guy and his, his girlfriend, they're sitting there, they're not dating. They're on Instagram, TikTok, whatever. I don't even have a TikTok, but that's not dating, right? I see families doing. I see a 17-year-old, 15-year-old kid and mom or dad. They're all just sitting there like that. That's not the parent I want to be. I want to be in the moment with my kids.
Yeah, we get sucked into that sometimes, and I tend to catch myself in the restaurant if we're both sitting there on our phone. I'm like, what am I doing?
Yeah,
Like, it's one thing if it's
yeah,
something relevant. Hey, somebody sends you something or calls you, whatever. But like 9 times out of 10, I'm just mindlessly on my phone because I have an inkling of boredom in my life.
yeah,
Just the faintest bit of boredom, and I'm like, I need stimulation. Like, let me go into this
yeah.
thing and look at a screen to give me. And it's funny because in North Georgia, there's still no cell service there. We got you've been
That's
once,
nice.
but we got some Wi-Fi. But I'm not a napper in any way. Like I haven't napped since I was home when we first had the baby. Like I'm just not a napper. Last Saturday, I fell asleep twice in the same day because I wasn't on my phone and I'm just laying there and I'm
Yep.
exhausted, but I just kind of I'm laying out on a porch and the rain starts coming down and I'm like, you know what? I feel real
Just
good.
let
I
it
just
go.
kind of dozed off and fell asleep and I was like, this is great. Like
It
this
is.
is great. So yeah,
I mean, that's for me. Like that's same thing, man. That front porch at the house or at the farmhouse. That's phone stays inside. There are no other distractions. It's that and that's it. And I have fallen asleep in probably a $15 white plastic Walmart chair and woken up with a crick in my neck. But it's been some of the
I
best sleep of my life.
I am the world's worst about getting off of my phone. So this is by no means high and mighty me. But
No, no, I get
but
that.
yeah, it
Well, hey, let's. Speaking of, sorry to cut
no.
you off, but speaking of Northwest Georgia, probably one of the most
Oh,
unique evenings of my life was spent with you and three other solid men.
tubing in the pitch black of night down a river.
What was supposed to be a short tubing experience turned into 6 hours of tubing in pitch
It
black
was something
darkness.
like that.
Um,
For some context, we tubed down this river every summer as kids. And it had been, I don't know, 8 years at that time when me and you and a group of us from college went. And we put in a different spot than normal, much higher up. That we never used to put in at this like mouth of the water. And so we put in higher and we got out lower. And around every turn, everybody was like, "Is this it?" I was like, "Oh yeah, yeah, it's right around this corner." And newsflash, it wasn't around that corner. It was 18 corners
no.
later. I mean, we are all purple and shaking and freezing because it's August. But guess what? It
Yep.
doesn't matter when you're in the water and it's pitch black. It gets cold. And gosh, as miserable as we were in the moment, that was one of the most fun and memorable days of my life, I think. And I mean, it comes up anytime any one of the five of us get together. That's the first story all of us go to is like, hey, remember when, this happened? And it's a great time.
I'll never forget it, man. It's definitely one where in the moment you're shivering, your tail off, but at the end of the day, too, the the amount of comedy that took place in that 6 hour period I mean, from every end every person involved and every end that you could go with something.
Well,
It was probably the hardest laughing I've done, to where I was hoarse the next
oh
day
yeah.
because we did it for
Oh
6 hours
yeah.
straight.
And at this point we're getting to the point because I'm the last one that had kids in that group. And it's like at
Hmm.
this point where my mind goes is like, all right, now we need to plan the family trip and
Hmm.
do it in a couple years with the kiddos and go down the river. Obviously a much more condensed version and not quite as long, but like take them on that same river and go do the whole mountain experience because it's like
Yeah.
we it certainly wasn't the glamping thing. I mean, we kind of got out in the woods and it was a good time though. It was a great
I
memory.
loved it. I'd go back tomorrow and do it all again, like knowing how much fun we had.
Oh gosh,
I
yeah.
think there was a certain individual, we will not name names. There was a certain individual, I think, ready to murder basically the two of us because you and I were cutting up the
The
most about
person
it.
the
But
most
I thought
the
it was
person the
great.
most miserable tubing down the river was the Eagle Scout. Was one of the Eagle Scouts on the trip, which was the irony of it. But
I was one of the Eagle Scouts too, but I
I
wasn't freaking
legitimately,
out about it.
Farrell, I'm just saying, I legitimately thought I ruined a friendship. I
You did
remember
not know.
JB was close to me, and
No.
I said, "Hey, is he ever gonna forgive me for this?" Because I mean, I thought I was written out of the books for him as a friend for life. Uh,
No. And then 2 hours after we end, we're playing multiplayer Mario Kart in the basement of the
yeah,
cabin. So no, that
yeah,
was all was well. It was
yeah. That
hilarious.
was
But
funny. I forgot about
in
that.
in the moment, I can see where you might have thought that.
Oh
I can
yeah,
see where you
oh
thought
yeah.
that.
I was not his
I mean,
friend in
but
that moment.
but listen, I mean, at the end of the day, like, those experiences, good intentions, sometimes some things happen, but at the end of the day, it was still a fun time. It was a
Yeah,
great
they
time.
live
And
on.
we need more of that. We need more of that as men. We need more of that as fathers, because as much as we need to be there for our children, we need to be around other men to talk about what's going on and also kind of reset ourselves as well so we can give more to our
So let me
kids.
ask you one thing.
So,
I know you're about to wrap it. I've got a question for you.
yeah.
Have and putting you on the spot a little bit. I didn't ask you this beforehand. Have you
Okay.
read anything good lately?
Yeah, actually, I read a lot.
You're a
So
better man than me then.
I so I try to read a mixture of both fiction and nonfiction. But I'm finally wrapping up the third Edmund Morris, the trilogy of Theodore Roosevelt. So it's his third book on Theodore Roosevelt. So I'm nearing the completion of that. But I think I've got a couple of books I've picked up recently, but I think I'm going to be focusing more on a few other business related, I think, opportunities in the near future. Some books that are more focused on management skill set. Making sure that I'm continuing to grow there. Um, there's um, there's an individual coming to town, Rob Luna. He's going to be here in Nashville, and he's got a really good book out about financial
Hmm.
management. As I grow, having 3 kids, I've got 3 college funds, and I've got 2 daughters, and that means I've got 2 weddings. And if Southern rules still apply by the time they're getting married, I'll have 2 weddings to pay for. Um, God help
God
me,
help
but
you.
I'm trying to make sure that I'm making the right decisions now, which is why we budget. To make sure that all that's handled and taken care of. I don't want to be, you know, I don't want to be missing opportunities, and so that's what I asked you the question, like, what are you working towards? That's what I'm trying to work towards is the final the final checkbox of long term financial management, right? That's my kind of
Yeah.
final piece.
Well, interesting.
But
Well, there you go.
but it's not, we're not spending money or anything like that, but just where to save and how to invest. That's what we're focused on
It's
right
always
now.
the question.
So, but it is, and I'm not an expert in it. I mean, people buy from us because we're experts in our fields, and we invest with others that are experts in
Yep.
their fields.
That's it.
That's best we can do. Brother, I can't thank you enough for
Yeah.
coming on
Thanks
here,
for
man.
having me.
It's
It was fun.
it's good to see you, and thank you for being number
Yeah.
one,
It was a
brother.
lot of fun. We'll
Appreciate
do
it.
it again.
So, you you need to come up to the farm and have a cigar with me on the porch, and we'll catch
Dude,
up in
you tell
person.
me when. I'm not that far anymore.
I know. Well, I've got some availability, not this week, but next. So if you're
Heck,
free
I
next
might
week,
I
let's do
might
it.
be closer than you at this point.
I think you are,
Yeah.
actually. I think you are. I'm an hour and 15 minutes to the door.
I don't
So
even think it's an
you're
hour for
probably
me.
Yeah. Well, if you come, you need to I need to stop at Bucky's, and my wife likes those Bucky's gummy bears. If you can just pick up a
They're
pack
pretty
of those
good.
for my wife, that'd be great. They
Pretty
are. They're
good.
dangerous. They'll get you.
Well, thanks, buddy.
All right, dude. Well, thanks for being here, man. I'll talk to you
Bye.
soon.